Welcome to That's What I Call Marketing, the podcast where you will hear from the leading lights in the marketing world and listen to their unique insights. Well, I'm delighted you've joined me again for another episode of The Singles, and I'm really looking forward to talking to Dan and Jasper from Tracksuit and hearing about some of the hot marketing topics that are out there right now. Of course, before we get going, if you are enjoying That's What I Call Marketing and could do one small favor, you could rate or review the episode that you're listening to, share it with somebody else, or subscribe to the podcast. It really does help grow our audience, and of course you'll never miss an episode again, so double win there. As I said, we are going to be talking to Dan and Jasper from Tracksuit, and we've got some great topics to cover today. We're going to be talking about streaming, Sprite and threads, and let's see how we bring all of that together. And of course it is powered by Tracksuit data. It's a wonderful thing about these episodes. It isn't just our opinions. We are using the power of the Tracksuit dashboard to tell more of the story. And of course, at this point, you know that Tracksuit is the always on, affordable, beautiful brand tracking platform that helps you as marketers, both brand and agency side, tell the story of the power of your brand. Now, I know that brand tracking can be prohibitive for many, many brands. It's just out of reach, or you get to do a once a year dip. And really, we need to be tracking our brand on an ongoing basis and then looking at those trends over time. And that is the power of Tracksuit. You'll be able to have an affordable brand tracking platform always on. And it helps you have those conversations with CEOs, CFOs. And the incredible thing is you get to share the data with them. They can get access to the dashboard and they can understand and have a shared language with you as a marketer. So it's an incredibly powerful dashboard. You can check out more about it at gotracksuit.com. And I know that the team are ready, willing, and on hand to show you the power of Tracksuit. So let's get into today's episode with Dan and Jasper from Tracksuit. Dan and Jasper, thanks a million for joining me again on The Singles. Great to see you both.
Great to see you, Conor.
Enjoying the change in weather we're getting. It's like, we have heat waves into lashing of rain. And maybe it might be back to a heat wave. Who knows?
T-shirts into cardigans.
Listen, we've loads we want to try to get through today. First off, we wanted to talk a bit about streaming. And I was looking at a Wall Street Journal report. Makes me sound smart, but it was reporting that streamers are finally making money. Right, and consumers it's getting messier for consumers. So they reported that Disney's entertainment streaming business, which is home to Hulu and Disney Plus, has swung into profit in recent quarters, and Netflix, which is the industry leading in terms of customer retention. So it seems to be like it's a hugely dense space. It seems to be like everyone's popping up with maybe a new offering, a new service, but they're finding ways, I guess, to make money and make profit, because it's kind of an industry where they have to invest in the content as well. But like, you guys have seen some really interesting stuff from the US in terms of the streaming services.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting because streaming, as you said, is such a saturated market, but everyone feels like they're going into this maturity stage now. So an example of that is Netflix in their latest earnings report moved away from reporting on subscriber counts to now focusing on revenue and profitability. And it feels like they're now starting that journey of, hey, we trust ourselves as the market leader that we don't have to talk to grow at all cost metrics, and we can start to focus on the financial metrics that everyone cares about on Wall Street. I didn't read that article. Thanks for sharing that ahead of time, Conor. But it does feel like collectively the brands in the category are now going towards, hey, how do we monetize our audiences? And Netflix was born from how do we create the highest quality content to have that as their base, to now add an ad platform on top. So it's really interesting. And I mean, it does feel like streaming just continues to eat the world in terms of just the size of the category. We've reported from our Tracksuit data that streaming as a category is now reaching over 200 million adults in the US, which is just absolutely incredible. And I don't know, surprisingly, that growth is led by two sections of consumers. The first being older demographics, so over 35 plus, and the other being...
That's older.
Yeah. I mean, like...
I think you're going to say over 65.
Well, I mean, when we look at that, the ancient category there, they're driving. Actually, interesting. Over 50s are driving 36% of YouTube TV like screen time, which is quite, I thought was quite surprising.
That is, yeah.
So typically, what has been, I feel like streaming is always blanketed with a younger demographic, creator led, Mr. Beast style, but now we're actually finding it's across all demographics. And Netflix by far is still the market leader across all demographics, which is quite ridiculous if you think about splitting all demographics, age, gender, region, that there's one category leader. They sit at 34% preference. But that second spot to the Prime Videos, to the Hulus, to the Disneys is really demographic dependent. So there's different leaders for each, different second place leaders for various different demographics, which is interesting.
That is interesting, and like it has to probably come down to or it doesn't have to, but like the type of content that's on offer, like, and maybe, there's some that are going to be more reality show based, where there's others that's going to be leaning on their Marvel category. You know what I mean?
I mean, I think it allows for, because of that, the media buying opportunity now against all the different brands in the category allows you to follow the audience, to your point, where does the best content reside? Maybe Prime Video, if you're trying to focus on 35 plus, can keep anchoring towards Netflix for more premium. So it means that it's not about how do I fit streaming into my media mix. It's probably where do I fit the various different providers or brands into my streaming media buying. It's also just across the advertising landscape, the amount of investment that's going towards connected TV, the penetration of connected TV across the US. It is really starting to feel like it's genuine mass market brand building opportunity, which is quite cool, because I feel that streaming always gets bucketed with fragmented, how do I choose? But now it's actually, there's so much selection, and I can now get so much more granular, especially with this Netflix ad suite that they've bundled on top. I can get super detailed about what data, who am I going to buy for, and start to follow this trend even further.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in there actually to that point, because I came across a really interesting Nielsen article on how connected TV is essentially transforming advertising. And really what it was highlighting is how connected TV, so CTV, is rapidly becoming a dominant face in the television landscape and a critical component of modern advertising strategies. So according to Nielsen's recently released ad-supported gauge, 72.4% of the time US viewers spend with television is ad-supported, and 42.4% of that viewing time is spent on streaming. So essentially that shift is obviously presenting a major opportunity for marketers. And in their recent annual marketing report, they highlighted that 56% of marketers globally plan to increase their spend on OTT or CTV advertising in 25, which is up slightly from 53% last year. And CTV is one of the few digital channels where planned spending increases year on year, with the most significant growth planning coming from the Americas, which is, as Dan highlighted, is obviously the data that we're looking at. And I think when you start to look into that enhanced reach and precise targeting capabilities, the channel itself just enables brands to connect with specific audience segments based on viewing habits, demographic profiles, declared interests. When we look at our data from the past 6 months, so from November last year through to April this year, we've seen a 3 percentage point increase in category penetration, and that's across all demographics in the streaming services category. And as Dan highlighted, with just over 200 million people in the US active in the category, that represents a significant influx of new users, that 3 percentage point. So I think what's important, I think, to probably remember here is that growth within the category just highlights a major opportunity for marketers to continue to integrate connected TV and streaming platforms into their strategies, but also to ensure that these platforms are fully incorporated into their data and targeting efforts.
Yeah, because it often, up to now, probably has felt a bit like an add-on to linear TV. It's like, your linear TV, and then it's like, and we'll do something here. Right. It was, and it's kind of almost a bit like sometimes with radio as well. It's like, radio and digital audio, but actually that balance is kind of it needs to be more integrated into the planning process, I think.
Totally. It felt previously quite experimental, and now
Yeah.
it's a must-have.
Yeah. And I think that kind of bakes into this broader piece just about strategizing on an omni-channel approach and not segmenting linear from non-linear and looking at them in silo and looking at them separately. It's about looking at them as an integrated channel.
Yeah. And it's like the stuff that, Grace Kite talks about, kind of, the multiplier effect, how all these things work together. And then, as you say, then how you can get better, maybe creative and content in front of people, different stages of consideration of your product or whatever it is. Like, you can really get that idea of kind of, I remember a long time ago, ages you were talking about it, like hyper personalization, and it never came. And I don't know if we'll ever get to hyper, as in one-on-one. We remember we talk about that for a while. One-to-one marketing.
Yeah.
Well, that's I don't know. You have to go on the street for that, I think. Shake a bucket. But I think that idea of kind of just being able to be more thoughtful about who the audience are, the platform that they're engaging with, and then how you want to show up in that. Because if you're watching YouTube Shorts, it should be different. Whereas if you're watching something, let's say on, just taking YouTube as an example, but more like a program, then maybe it should be more like advertising. There's lots of things to think about.
Yeah. And I think it's also, to your point there, Conor, of like following the audience, it's following the momentum as well. And Netflix reported that half of their new signups are all nominating for ad-supported memberships. And so that growth of users organically selecting ads, which is, it's previously been, how do I shy away from an ad? And that could also be economic environment and whatnot. But if that is where the growth is, and it is going to be ad supported, what an phenomenal opportunity to play there and get all the data that you get from a streaming service that is capturing all demographic data. So,
and I did see something, and I only remember it now, and so I won't have the detail, but I'll try find it and even stick it in the notes of the show notes. But that Netflix are doing more contextual AI-based advertising around products that you might see in a show. So there's a way then to connect that to a shopping experience that you can kind of go and say, that thing I saw. So I'm going to try to find that, because I was like, I read it and I was like, that's interesting. And now I'm just kind of, I wish I'd looked at that again before we spoke.
Well, speaking of the power of preference, Conor, what's your preferred platform? Are you a Netflix guy? Are you a Prime guy? Are you a Disney Plus guy?
This is the one-to-one survey.
Yeah. And this is personalized. It's Netflix, and then really interestingly, which like probably psychologists something might look at. My wife enjoys watching programs about people murdering their husbands and stuff.
I'll just
a lot of that. So I don't know what our contextual advertising would be about. But the kids are YouTube Shorts, I almost, to the point where I would say, like, go, would you stop? You need to stop watching YouTube Shorts. Would you just put on Netflix? Like, that's the preference. I'm not like, there's no even, would you put on the TV? Like, as in like, a main channel. Like, would you just watch something on Netflix?
Yeah.
What about you, Jasper? Are you just getting hit with Chelsea membership constantly?
I'll have to say I'm a Netflix. I'm a Netflix guy.
Loyalist.
That's loyalist. My fiance is Disney Plus through and through. Okay. But I'm Netflix. I'm Netflix all day.
Nice.
What about Dan?
I've been trying Disney recently, and then also kind of off script, but for the first time cancelled my Spotify membership to go with YouTube Music. So I'm giving that away. Yeah. There's a little curveball for your 28th of May.
And of course, people can watch episodes of the Singles on YouTube anytime. Enjoy them. Brilliant. Well, listen, we'll move on to Sprite. And Sprite was in the news. They announced a limited time soda, obviously in the US. It was Sprite and tea. So Sprite plus tea hit the shelves across the US. and is expected to stay through to October. And it was floated by a team of interns 6 years ago. I thought that was fascinating. And of course, last April, Sprite brought back Obey Your Thirst, which was kind of their classic line and classic piece of creative. And they brought it back. And well, is it working?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, so Sprite been around since 1961, but last year, as you say, they sort of strategically moved to make themselves more culturally relevant to a new generation. And I think, but before diving into the Obey Your Thirst work, I find that brands reigniting historic taglines and campaigns is a really interesting marketing strategy. It's that common theme, obviously, throughout these episodes, isn't it? It's tapping into that emotional advertising piece by leveraging nostalgia to reconnect with old and new audiences. Mm-hmm. So a couple, and I'm sure you guys probably have some favorites to jump out, but in 2023, Branston resurrected their 1970s Bring Out the Branston's logo with Wonderhood Studios. In that same year, Morrison's brought back their More Reasons logo in a brand revamp with Leo Burnett. And I think, so in 94, Sprite first launched their iconic Obey Your Thirst campaign, as you mentioned, Conor. And then in April last year, supported by WPP's OpenX, they reignited the Obey Your Thirst campaign, marking the 30th anniversary of the original 94 campaign. And essentially, the revival aimed to connect with Gen Z by blending nostalgia with contemporary cultural relevance. So the campaign featured NBA star Anthony Edwards, as well as Olympic sprinter Sha'Carri Richardson. And the work paid homage to Sprite's past through the lens of today's cultural landscape with a fresh twist designed to connect with a new audience in Gen Z. And essentially, by reigniting this work and shifting from functional messaging to emotional storytelling, what we've seen is that they've leapfrogged Pepsi in our data to become the number 3 soft drink brand in the US, and they're now the number 2 brand among the 18 to 24-year-olds. Wow. And I think what's important is how we're seeing this trickle then further into our Tracksuit data over in the US. So 68% among the Gen Z demographic currently consider Sprite versus 59% overall. And 21% among the Gen Z demographic currently prefer Sprite versus 9% overall. And we're seeing 2 drivers behind this. So first being relevance. So 38% of Gen Z aware of Sprite say it's a brand for people like me, which is a crucial metric that increases consideration by just over 2.5 times. And trust as well. So 48% of Gen Z associate Sprite with a brand I trust, which ties in with Dr. Pepper and is critical for top of funnel conversion in the category.
It's such an interesting one because I guess it begs the question, and we don't have the answer. Why do they drop Obey Your Thirst in the first place and not just, keep it fresh consistently over time? It's that kind of someone had the brainwave to go back and kind of say, actually, this was working. I've talked about it before. Like the great example here was the National Lottery here that had a line called "It Could Be You," and when Paul Durbin went into that role a number of years ago, he did the right thing. He was like, well, what's resonating with people? What's people connecting to? Yeah. And unprompted, people were saying "It Could Be You" was a line for the National Lottery, and they hadn't used it for 8 years. Yeah. I was like, we're bringing that back because that's like free.
Yeah,
that's I'm living rent free in your head.
yeah. I mean, it is interesting. I mean, I know you mentioned about why perhaps they moved on from it in the first place, but I think what it more presents, almost taking perhaps sort of a slightly different angle view to it, is this power that heritage brands do have, which is the power of historic work, original work prior to, let's just say, modern day, and that ability to then be able to lean into that and drive in this nostalgic piece by, as we've said, not just reconnecting with older demographic existing audiences who would have been aware of the work at the time, but equally of new audiences, which can, I think, when you have that correlation between the old and the new, even those people that are experiencing it for the first time will start to understand almost sort of the heritage of it as soon as they learn of the fact that, this is reignited work. And I think that's just where it becomes, a particularly interesting piece. And I mean, ultimately for Sprite, they didn't overhaul the product. They modernized its story and they just doubled down on that resonance. And I think it's just about looking as to almost that emotional relevance being a faster path to brand preference than functional benefits, I think, especially with younger audiences.
Completely. We also saw Dr. Pepper do something similar last year. I can't remember if you saw their like viral pickle campaign on TikTok and how they were resonating with younger demographics by essentially just running with the same positioning that they've had for the last 100 years or so, which was different pepper, high flavor. And they also jumped Coca-Cola last year in terms of
Right.
Yeah.
younger audience preference, and then also showed how they could essentially jump from legacy positioning or their heritage essentially to then resonating with a younger demographic that wouldn't have been familiar with Dr. Pepper during its great years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's great work. And I think then the other, and you mentioned, Jasper, is that kind of, tapping into culture and really kind of investing to understand the cultural nuances of today and how that you can be relevant. So like cultural insight, I think those two words, even on their own but also together, can be overused in marketing, but it's really trying to understand that, and it's hard work, right? And I've been lucky enough to work with Doug Cameron, who's kind of an expert in this space, and actually seeing how he was able to spend a huge amount of time investing in understanding cultural insights and getting to stuff that was so kind of almost the underbelly of what's coming next. That's tapping into that is really hard. And then but then there's trends that you're just never going to figure out. Like I was talking to Marcus Collins about that, and like how do you account for something that just becomes a trend that at the time I spoke to him, it was the demure thing on TikTok, and I was like who saw that coming? And he was like, no, nobody.
Completely. And I think particularly in today's world where many categories are pretty cluttered, and I think obviously we spoke to the connected TV piece. Obviously, when you've got suddenly this sort of landscape in which you're trying to drive cut through, you're trying to create noise, and you're trying to connect with particular demographics or particular audience groups, whatever it might be, but then you've also got this sort of plethora of options to strategize on. I think one of the most important pieces here, and exactly as you mentioned, Conor, is just this relevance piece. And I think that investing in cultural insight work and testing that positioning to make sure that whatever that strategy will be once executed will align with that particular demographic or cohort of people, if you're going to be hyper targeted in that way, is just, it's such a critical part to it.
I wonder if it's also just operationally, how do you set up your marketing team so that they can move with the pace of a startup and to not be so dictated and rigid around what is a brand guideline of where you can play and what you can say. And coming back to what we talked about a fortnight ago, where Duolingo do this so phenomenally, and Liquid Death, in terms of brand law, which is how do you flow within the pace of culture on all the various channels.
Yeah.
And because I feel like the Unilevers, the Procters and Gamble's get this all the time, where you're a house of brands and it's criticism to not act like a startup, but it's actually no, don't try and be a startup. Leverage every part of your heritage because that is such a competitive advantage, but operationally behave like a startup and show up.
Yeah.
Show up in, wherever that might be, on TikTok in comments like a Ryanair might do.
Yeah, exactly. And it's you're right, and it's how you almost culturally, for using that word again, but like, or set it up, the permission, the right guardrails, that it's like within all of this everything's fine. I think Paddy Power do it brilliantly. Like they just have those kind of guardrails of this is what we know we can say. We trust the team that are going to say it, and it's like that's hard to get right. You have to build it up over time, and that's fine. You know what I mean? You do, and you might get a few things wrong, and but I think then that's the protection that maybe the CMO or whoever is like, I'll take the fall for all those things, because if we've agreed that these are the guardrails. So it's a huge cultural shift, I think.
Yeah, completely.
And some of those bets just don't require that much investment either. So you can get a lot of things wrong because it might be a social post or a comment, which we've seen lots of brands kind of misread their brand alignment on a comment or a response. But it's not like you're investing such a big portion of your budget. It's just having the freedom to play in that fast-paced, reactive world.
Yeah. And even like, Ryanair is such a great example. And but we've talked about this before. Like, not everyone has to be Ryanair.
Yes.
I think that's sometimes people are like, oh, we should be more like Ryanair.
Completely.
And I think Ryanair aren't even doing Ryanair as good as they used to when Michael Corcoran was there. I think they're trying to go back to what he did.
Yeah.
And it's just not landing as well. They've kind of gone a bit mean, and like his was clever. It was never mean. And so there's these little nuances that are really interesting to get right. I saw one a couple of weeks ago and I was like, that's just nasty.
Yeah.
Why would you?
Yeah.
Well, listen, we'll move on to talking about Threads. Of course, like, there's no week that Mark Zuckerberg isn't in the news. Of course, was out in the last couple of weeks. He's basically going to take over all creative. You'll just have to, I don't know, look at your computer and it will know what your small business needs from a creative sense. It's, phenomenal. The thing is, I don't doubt some of that will happen, and we'll see where it goes. But he's got a vision for the future. But also, they announced the expansion of their marketing API to support advertising on Threads, which is really interesting. So it's going to allow marketers manage ad creation via third-party platforms. So it's kind of now Threads is kind of trying to go full into, it really trying to take on X, but it's trying to take on, the advertising dollars that go there as well. But you're seeing that it is growing fast in some markets. Is it the UK that you guys are looking specifically at?
Yeah, that's right. So in the UK, so interestingly, what we're seeing within our data is their lower funnel metrics aren't performing in the same way as their top of funnel metrics. So again, exactly as you mentioned with Mark Zuckerberg. For context, obviously Threads is the social media app developed by Instagram, used for sharing text updates and joining in public conversations, and designed to be text-based, where users can express ideas and engage in discussions. And whilst we were looking at our data over the past 12 months, so from May of last year through to April of this year within the social media platforms category in the UK, we have noticed some sharp gains and quick wins. So their awareness is up from 41% to 53%. Their consideration is up from 10 to 16%. And their usage is up not from 9 to 13%, sorry. And where that growth is strongest is within that 18 to 34-year-old demographic. However, despite those gains and those wins, their preference still remains at 0. And only 13% of those aware associate Threads with is for people like me. So that relatability piece. And in this category, that association is crucial. It makes people over 8 times more likely to consider the platform. And I think this is just then looking into more broadly how Threads, perhaps, but other platforms within the space can be looking to win the category. I think it's not just about looking at building awareness. I think it's if you're going to be running an awareness campaign, you don't stop there. You continue to build personal relevance in parallel to achieve that conversion throughout the funnel, because ultimately it can act as the missing link between awareness and action, and that element that turns recognition into engagement, and as I mentioned, ultimately into conversion.
Yeah, it's like getting to that, as you say, awareness piece. I think people are aware that it exists, and it's funny. Like I'm always interested and curious in all these new platforms. I haven't even tried to look at Threads. There's something about it that just doesn't appeal to me to kind of go there. But I think that's just, I don't know why. Maybe it's an age thing.
I'm with you, especially as there's such a pullback from X. It feels like there's been such a pullback from X. I think adoption's still really high on Threads, but it seems like it still hasn't cracked through as much. And back to Jasper's point there on relevance, it feels like it's lacking there, even though the market opportunity probably has never been greater for there to be a new entrant in this space.
Yeah. But I do think then looking at what they're, the fact that they're kind of expanding the marketing API to it, like, do you know what I mean? They're the plans. I think sometimes you see that with some of these platforms, they've been there before, Meta have been there before trying to do stuff like this, and they've pulled back. Google the same. So this is clearly not a pullback. They're going kind of all in on this and they see the future revenue opportunity. So I guess they're seeing right now we now need to make sure that it is relevant. So, I wonder, will there be product changes or, things like that on the path that will kind of help people engage and, spend more time with it?
Yeah, completely. I think there's going to need to be that, I suppose, sort of momentum of iterating and evolving to continue to sort of drive, because, as we spoke about, it's one thing to be aware and to be winning within that space, or at least a leading player within the category in that space. But I think if you're not going to be converting that into loyalty, there's got to be then perhaps strategies and approaches that are then embedded into whatever their sort of future plans are to be able to achieve that piece. And I think, by bringing in, say, the API and enabling perhaps some hyper targeting advertising messaging to perhaps start to build relevance, obviously provides a big opportunity for advertisers. But I think it's also about how they can then continue to perhaps double down on that specific demographic if that is their target.
Yeah. I guess, like, going back to the starting point, like, what Zuckerberg's been out saying about the role that Meta are going to play in creating the work and, not needing... He was almost saying you won't need a marketing team at some point. Like, what was your guys' take on that? I mean, it's, again, these... people like him are setting the vision and their big ideas, and it's kind of, you sit on stage and you say these things. But, like, what's your take on what he was saying?
My short hot take on it's all been, I feel like LinkedIn's been polluted recently with just like doom and gloom AI takes nonstop across like the spectrum of every sector. I think that he's selling the vision, to your point, and that obviously the data and the tools and the capability they have is exceptional, but I just don't see a world where marketers or brands are just leveraging one platform or multiple platforms to do absolutely everything. And like anything that we've seen in like technological advancement, it just allows people to create space to do more difficult, more challenging work more quickly, or actually be able to start to tackle that work because they were previously bogged down with less challenging or more actually automated work. So I feel like it just creates more space for agencies, creatives, media planners to do more of that challenging or more of the what was considered impossible, just be allocating more of their time there. So I think just it's all caught up in the AI doom and gloom, but it was pretty outrageous.
I would echo that, and I would also build that I don't think it would get to a point, personally speaking, obviously my own opinion, where it would be replacing agencies and would be replacing marketing functions. I think from what I've seen from several different opinion pieces on it, which I think is an interesting take and one that I actually probably do agree with most, which is that I think brands and businesses that learn how to embrace AI properly will start to win within categories, and it will help provide them the competitive advantage, but never to a point of replacing humans and people behind the work. Because I think critically, without trying to sound like I'm repeating myself throughout all episodes, but we've spoken almost across every episode about the power of human connection, emotional storytelling. And that is something which I think intrinsically will come from the human lens and human layer over work. I think AI can help build and provide the foundations for perhaps a new approach, a new strategy, a new method, perhaps explore how it could be executed creatively. But I don't think it will ever be kind of the buck stops with it.
Yeah. And I've even seen stuff, in recent kind of work that I've been doing where, like, genuinely it was the humans that, made it better.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, so starting point might have been for me, I don't even know if it was, but like it was, what if we did this, or what if they said that? Like, and I know, you're never going to get that. Maybe you will, I don't know. But I do think those moments of, smartness and, humanity that you're not going to get. I just don't think you're going to get that.
I think it does actually play into being like the most phenomenal co-pilot to help you get to 0 to 1, to just accelerate how quickly you can move, operate, optimize, all of that, but requires the guidance for a human to direct and support, for sure.
I think that, like, the days of the blank sheet of paper are gone. Do you know what I mean? Trying to figure out, where will I start? Like, that's gone. You can get a framework in like 30 seconds. You go, oh, okay. So I think that's That's wonderful. Do you guys track Mark Zuckerberg? Has he got a, for people like me, rating?
Leave that with us.
Yeah. Well, surprisingly, we actually track music artists. So we're looking at Ed Sheeran, Taylor Swift.
Oh wow! We're gonna have to talk about that. We're gonna have to talk about that. Listen, before we go, you guys are have been on the road. You're often on the road. You're out meeting and greeting people. I know, Dan, you were in Ireland last week. I know there's plans for the Tracksuit team to be over at Cannes in a couple of weeks' time as well. So I know, yeah, if there's kind of places people can find you. I know, obviously, go to LinkedIn, find both of you guys on LinkedIn, but obviously go Tracksuit and contact the team. But any other plans to be out and about? Where can people find the Tracksuit folks? And will you be wearing tracksuits in Cannes? That's the most important question.
Hopefully some summer tracksuits. We might have to just cut them off at the knees and the shoulders.
James Herman style linen.
Yeah, exactly. No, I think, thank you, Conor. I mean, touch base on LinkedIn, and if you're heading over to Cannes, we'd love to catch up.
Yeah. Amazing stuff. Well, listen, guys, thanks a million. Appreciate your time again. Some really interesting insights powered by Tracksuit data, of course. We'll catch you again in a couple of weeks.
Thanks, Conor.
Thanks,
cheers. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of The Singles. Again, it is brought to you by the power of Tracksuit. You can check out the team at Tracksuit at gotracksuit.com, and of course you can find Dan and Jasper on LinkedIn, and they are going to be more than willing to chat to you about the power of the Tracksuit dashboard and what it can do for your brand, bringing brand tracking in reach for you within your budgets, and also helping enable better conversations with the C-suite. It really is an incredibly powerful tool. If you enjoyed today's episode, and you can leave a comment, rate or review, it really is incredibly helpful. I know it sounds like a really small thing, but it's a great way to help us grow and build on this engaged community of marketers just like you. And thank you so much for tuning in. As always, I really genuinely appreciate it. And of course, do leave your comments, because they help us improve the show all the time. And we're going to be back next week with another episode of That's What I Call Marketing. It's the slightly longer episodes, and we are gearing up for Cannes as well. So if you're headed over, to drop me a note on LinkedIn under my own name, Conor Byrne. And of course, the guys from Tracksuit are going to be at Cannes as well. So if you're there, you can find them in the Adweek space over Cannes. So I would say recommend you check that out and register for their events. So again, for me, your host, Conor Byrne, take care.